My son didn't ask whether it was a good time to call. He told me he had already bought the ticket. Nathan said he and his wife Rachel would land in Cebu on Thursday, and when I asked him why, he was quiet for a moment before he said, "Dad, Armando called us from your phone. You didn't answer for 9 days." That was when I understood this wasn't a visit. It was a search party. My name is Philip. I was 63 years old, recently retired, and a widower when I left my house in Ottawa and flew to the Philippines. My wife Helen had been gone for 2 years by then. She had been my person for 34 years, the one who made dinner at 6 every evening and insisted we go for walks even when the temperature dropped to -25. When Helen died, the house didn't become quiet. It became the wrong size entirely. My children, Nathan and his sister Karen, were kind in the way that good children are when a parent loses a spouse. They called regularly, invited me to holidays, included me in their lives. I never doubted they loved me. But Nathan lived in Vancouver with his wife and their 2 young boys, and Karen had recently moved to Halifax after her husband's company relocated. From Ottawa, that was 5,000 kilometers in one direction and 1,800 in the other. Most days I woke up, made coffee with the machine Helen had picked out, and sat at the kitchen table until I could find a reason to leave the house. The reason was usually groceries. Sometimes I drove to the library just to be somewhere with other people in it. I was 63 years old and in reasonable health, with a pension from 31 years in the federal public service, plus my CPP. By any sensible measure, I was fine. I was not fine. The idea of the Philippines came from a former colleague named Barry, who had retired 2 years before me and spent the last 18 months in Cebu. He sent me a message one February when Ottawa was in the middle of a stretch of -35 wind chills, and the photograph he attached showed him eating mangoes on a patio. We had never been particularly close at work, but I wrote back that afternoon, and we exchanged messages for 3 weeks before I started looking at flights. I didn't make a rash decision. I rented my house through a property management firm instead of selling it. I kept 6 months of living expenses in a Canadian account that nobody else could touch. I found a furnished apartment in a quiet residential area about 20 minutes from central Cebu, paid only the first month up front, and kept my return ticket open. I told Nathan and Karen I wasn't disappearing. I told them I was trying something while my knees still worked, and I still had time to be wrong about it. Nathan asked if I had met someone. I told him I hadn't. That seemed to concern him more than a woman would have. He could understand a man of 63 following a romance somewhere impractical. He couldn't understand why his father would leave a paid-off house in a good neighborhood with a reliable pension to go and sit alone in a country where he didn't know anyone and didn't speak the language. I had a hard time explaining it to him because I wasn't sure I could explain it to myself. What I knew was that I was not living in Ottawa. I was waiting there, and I was tired of waiting. The first weeks in Cebu were disorienting in ways I hadn't expected. The traffic moved in patterns I couldn't read. The heat was unlike anything I had experienced in 40 years of Canadian summers. And even small tasks, finding a pharmacy, figuring out which coins were worth what, took more energy than they should have. But there was something underneath all of that disorientation that I hadn't felt in a long time. I was paying attention again. I wasn't sleepwalking through a day I already knew. I started walking in the mornings before the heat peaked. About 3 weeks in, I found a small canteen near a park where a group of men seemed to gather every morning between 6 and 8. One of them, a man named Armando, had worked for the local barangay government before he retired, and he spoke English with a precision that occasionally made me feel self-conscious about my own grammar. He was 61 years old, and he carried himself with the particular ease of someone who had spent decades managing difficult situations calmly. Armando introduced me to his wife Cora, who worked part-time at a parish office 2 streets away. Within a month, Cora had started leaving food outside my apartment door on Sunday mornings, rice, a portion of whatever they had cooked, sometimes a small container of soup. When I tried to give her money for it, she looked at me with an expression that suggested I had said something genuinely puzzling, and told me that food was not a transaction. To me, Armando and Cora were the first real friends I had made in years. To Nathan, from a distance of 9,000 kilometers, they were strangers who had somehow become central to his father's daily life. I called home less often than I had in Ottawa. This didn't seem strange to me. In Ottawa, I had called because I was sitting alone in a house with nothing to do. In Cebu, I was walking, eating meals with people, exploring neighborhoods, and sometimes sitting with Armando on his front step in a companionable silence that required nothing at all. I thought the fact that I had less time to call would reassure my children that I was busy. Instead, it convinced them that something was wrong. In the 5th month, I caught a stomach illness that put me in bed for 3 days. It wasn't serious. Armando drove me to a clinic, a doctor gave me medication and told me to rest, and by the 4th day I was eating normally again. I decided not to mention any of it to Nathan or Karen. Nothing had actually gone wrong. I didn't want to worry them over something that had already resolved itself. What I didn't account for was the 9 days. I caught a second mild illness in the 7th month. Nothing more than a bad chest cold. I slept heavily for most of it and didn't look at my phone for what I thought was 4 or 5 days. I woke up on what turned out to be the 9th morning to find 22 missed calls from Nathan, 11 from Karen, and a text from Karen that said simply, "We don't know if you're okay. Please call us right now." Armando had noticed I hadn't appeared at the canteen for several mornings in a row. He knocked on my door, and when I answered, he could see immediately that I wasn't well. He called my children from my phone because my contact list was visible without unlocking it. He told Nathan calmly that his father had been ill, but was awake and sitting up and would call soon. Then he went and got Cora, and she came back with soup. Nathan called 30 seconds after Armando returned the phone to me. I could hear that he was frightened. I told him I was fine, that it was only a cold, that I was sorry I hadn't called. He said he was coming. I told him that wasn't necessary. He said he and Rachel had already decided. I met Nathan and Rachel at the arrivals area on a Thursday afternoon. My son is 40 years old and looks more like his mother than he realizes. He has Helen's habit of scanning a room when he enters it, taking stock of everything before he relaxes. He hugged me at the gate, and then held me at arm's length and looked at my face, as though he was searching for evidence of something I was concealing. They had brought one suitcase between them for a 4-day stay. That told me they had not come for tourism. By the time we reached my apartment, Nathan had already noted that the staircase had no second handrail, that the window locks were the old lever style, and that the street below wasn't well lit after 10 o'clock. Rachel said nothing. She watched. My daughter-in-law is a physiotherapist in Vancouver, and her habit of observing how people move their bodies is not something she turns off when she's not at work. She had already noticed my pace on the stairs. That first evening, Cora came to the door with rice and a stew she had started that afternoon. When Armando told her Nathan had arrived, I had forgotten she was coming. When she knocked, I called out that the door was open. She let herself in with the spare key I had given her 3 months earlier, and the first thing Rachel noticed was the key in her hand. The room became very still. I explained that I had given Armando and Cora the key after the chest cold, so that if anything happened and I couldn't come to the door, someone nearby could get in. It had seemed like a practical decision at the time. From where Nathan was standing, it looked like something very different. Cora understood immediately what was happening in the room. She placed the key on the counter and introduced herself to my son and daughter-in-law in the direct, unhurried way she approached everything. She told them Armando would come for coffee in the morning if that was all right. Then she left, and the key sat on the counter between us like a question none of us had agreed to answer yet. That night, Nathan asked whether I had given Armando or Cora any money. I said no. He asked whether they had borrowed anything, whether they had ever asked me for anything at all. I told him the only thing Cora had ever taken from me was an argument about whether I was allowed to pay for my own soup. He didn't laugh. He asked whether I had seen their identification, whether I knew who they actually were beyond what they had told me. I told my son I was 64 years old, that I had managed my own affairs, raised 2 children, spent 31 years navigating the federal public service, and filed my own taxes every April for 4 decades. He apologized, but the conversation had already shifted something, and we went to sleep that night on opposite sides of it. That night, after Nathan had gone to bed, Rachel stayed on the small balcony with me. She is not someone who speaks before she has decided what she wants to say, and we sat in the dark for a while before she said anything. She told me she had texted Cora that afternoon. She had found the number in the contact list Armando had given Nathan. She had sent one question she hadn't wanted to ask in front of my son. In Cora's honest assessment, had I ever seemed like someone who was struggling in ways I was hiding? Cora had written back 4 sentences. Rachel handed me the phone and let me read them. Your father-in-law does not pretend with us. When he is tired, we can see it. When he is lonely, he says so. The difference between now and when he first came is not small. It is like watching someone remember that they are still alive. Rachel was quiet when I gave the phone back to her. Then she said, I wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't prepared for it either. Not because it said anything I didn't already know, but because it was the first time someone had put it into words plainly enough that I couldn't look past them. Helen's death had not simply made me sad. It had made me invisible to myself, and I hadn't understood how invisible until I was somewhere far enough from my old life to see it clearly. We sat outside for a long time without speaking. When Rachel finally went to bed, she squeezed my shoulder on the way in and didn't say anything else. That was enough. The following morning, Armando arrived at 7:30. He sat across from Nathan at my kitchen table and answered every question my son asked. He explained how we had met, how often we spent time together, what had happened during the chest cold, and what he had done about it. He told Nathan that he had called because he would want someone to do the same if his own father were unreachable for 9 days, and he was on the other side of the world. That was the only reason. Nathan was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, I would have done the same thing. After breakfast, I took them through the parts of my life I had never thought to describe because they had seemed too ordinary to mention. The canteen where the morning group gathered, the market 2 streets, over where the vendors acknowledged me with the practical recognition extended to anyone who showed up regularly and didn't cause trouble. The walk I took most afternoons along a road lined with old trees where the temperature dropped several degrees in the shade. The clinic where the doctor knew my chart. At the clinic, the doctor who had treated me in the 5th month spent 10 minutes with Nathan. She told him my blood pressure was better than it had been on my intake form 7 months earlier, that I had kept every follow-up appointment, and that in her assessment I was in better physical condition than many men my age she treated. Rachel asked whether I was sleeping. The doctor said that was something only I could answer, but that my general presentation had improved consistently over the months she had known me. Nathan was quieter on the walk back. He had not stopped paying attention, but he was paying attention to different things. That afternoon I sat down with both of them and opened my laptop. I showed them my monthly CPP and pension deposits, my account balance, and a simple spreadsheet I had been keeping since I arrived. My expenses in Cebu, rent, utilities, food, transportation, clinic visits, ran to roughly 1,800 Canadian dollars a month. In Ottawa, between property taxes, utilities, groceries, and the car, I had been spending close to 4,000. The difference sat in my account every month and didn't move. Nathan studied the numbers for a long time. Finally, he looked up and said, I didn't know it was this organized. I told him I had been organizing my own finances longer than he had been alive. That evening, the four of us had dinner at Armando and Cora's house. There was nothing arranged about it. Cora cooked fish and rice and a vegetable dish I had never managed to identify correctly despite eating it many times. Armando and Nathan talked about Vancouver. Armando's nephew had worked there briefly, and Armando had visited once. Rachel helped Cora clear the dishes in the quiet, matter-of-fact way that people help when they have decided they are in the presence of someone trustworthy. I sat with Armando on the front step, the way we often did on evenings when there was nothing in particular that needed to be said. On the walk back to my apartment, Nathan was quiet for most of it. When we reached my building, he stopped at the bottom of the staircase and looked at the wall where a second handrail should have been. "This still has to be fixed," he said. 3 days earlier I would have taken that as an argument for why I should go home. But his voice was different now. He wasn't describing a reason I should leave. He was describing a problem that had a solution. We spent the rest of that night making a list. A second handrail. A ground floor unit to look for when my lease came up. A shared folder on my phone where I would keep my medical information, prescriptions, and clinic contact details. A regular Sunday video call, Ottawa time, that I would answer unless I had given them advance notice. A clear protocol with Armando. If I went more than 48 hours without contact and hadn't told him why, he would call Nathan directly and not wait 9 days to wonder. For every concern they raised, I agreed to find a practical answer. And for every practical answer, I stopped short of the one thing they had flown 9,000 kilometers hoping I would agree to. In the morning, Nathan told me they had looked into changing my return ticket. Then he told me they hadn't changed it. He said he and Rachel had talked the night before, after I went to bed. He had come to Cebu expecting to find a situation that confirmed what he feared. Instead, he had found something he wasn't sure he had words for. A life that looked nothing like the life he thought he understood. In a place he had imagined as a risk and discovered was a community. Rachel looked at me across the table and said, "I think we needed to see it to believe it." Before they left for the airport, we made every change on the list. Nathan installed an emergency contact application on my phone and walked Armando through how it worked. Cora agreed to return the key, and we arranged a small lockbox near my door with a code that both Nathan and Karen knew. I promised to tell my children when I was ill, not the cleaned-up version with all the worry removed, but the actual version, with enough truth in it for them to reach me if reaching me became necessary. Hiding the chest cold had not protected my children. It had only left them to build the worst possible source from the absence of information, and then fly 9,000 kilometers to confirm it. At the airport, Nathan held on longer than usual when we said goodbye. He told me he planned to come back the following year, and that next time he wanted to spend the whole visit following Armando's restaurant recommendation instead of inspecting my window locks. After they passed through security, I stood outside the terminal for a few minutes. 8 months earlier, being alone had felt like confirmation that my life was contracting, that I was gradually running out of things I was part of. Standing outside that terminal, alone and expected nowhere in particular, it felt like something else entirely. Armando was waiting by the car. Cora had sent a message asking what I wanted for lunch. 2 weeks later, I moved into a ground-floor apartment 6 minutes away. It had better light, a proper bathroom, and a second bedroom for when Nathan and Rachel came back with the boys. The lockbox went beside the new door. The Sunday calls became part of the week. Nathan and Armando eventually exchanged numbers directly, which I only discovered when I overheard Armando on the phone one morning describing a particular restaurant Nathan had asked about. My children had crossed an ocean because they believed I had gotten lost. What they found instead was that I had done something much harder and much less visible than getting lost. I had found my way back to a life that was mine. Not mine in relation to anyone else, not the version that fit into other people's calendars, but mine in the simplest way possible. A morning walk, a cup of coffee with a friend, the particular steadiness of being somewhere and knowing you belong there. Nathan had been afraid the Philippines was swallowing his father. He left knowing his father had simply moved into a room of his own life for the first time in years, and finally had enough space in it to breathe.